I'm David Orr. I'm son of Joe and Carol Orr, and reside in Brevard right now, but was born and raised over here in Hendersonville, and actually raised by this squad. So my dad was one of the first ones to actually get it started up through the VFW. When it was the Hendersonville, maybe I'm getting the names right, Hendersonville VFW Rescue Squad. And you actually had to be a member of the VFW before you could be onto it, but they came up with a special codicil, and some of the guys that were in the military but were not veteran of foreign war were able to join. I remember the old place that was, I think it's the old water department. It was on a back alley behind the city hall. You couldn't jump up and down too much because we weren't sure of the trusses underneath. And wherever a vehicle could be put in, that's where it was put in at.
My name's Tom Edmondson, and I was in the rescue squad, came into the rescue squad in the mid-60s. I had come out of the service and went to work for the city police department in 1963. And at that time, there was a policy that if you worked for the police department, you couldn't belong to the organization. You could support it, but you really couldn't be a member. Well, I got involved one night out on Osceola Lake. I went out to a wreck that was there, and they were suspecting that a person had drowned when the car ran off into the lake. And they kept wondering, well, how are we going to find out? How are we going to find out? Well, I said, well, I'll take off my uniform and in my skivvies, and I'll dive down there and I'll look and see if there's anybody in the car. So anyway, that happened, and there was not someone in the car. But while I was in the water, the wrecker driver said, well, would you hook up the car so we can pull it out of the water to make sure. I went on to leave the police department, go into to an auto mechanics job, and worked there for about 7 years, still working with the rescue squad. It happened to be a frame and front end job where you learned an awfully lot about the mechanics of vehicle wrecks during the framework and how to reverse that bent metal so that you could get someone out. And that the cars, the way they were designed or are still designed, they have crumple zones that are built in to try to absorb some of that impact. And extrication at that time was the simple basic tools, porta-power jacks, and some come-alongs, and a few things like that. But there were specific locations on a vehicle that you could place that jack in the doorpost area of a vehicle, or right behind the seat, and put a jack in and put it in the elbow where the car in the windshield comes around, and put a pressure on that, and you could pretty well roll a dash out of someone's lap. Well, I was asked then, after we got to fooling with that a little bit, that I would be the training officer for the rescue squad. Well, that lasted year after year after year for quite some time.
Okay, Anthony, we got to start spreading, okay?
All right.
There's nothing there. Functional fractures, possible brain injury.
Okay, cut that.
Scissor gun in.
Pat? Get the feet. Angled out that way. That's fine.
Which way are you coming out? Here, back. Okay, hold these on. Okay. Pat, let's go to the ground. What? Let's go to the ground. Okay.
They trained a lot, and it was on new equipment that nobody had seen before. I remember the first SCBA that they got. They decided they wanted to see if it could be used underwater, so they dammed up a sump pump and went underwater with that SBA and back to drown somebody. But it was not intended for underwater use. But they were always training. But we would go camping, and people that could would set up on Friday night. The others would come in Saturday morning, smell what was left of the coffee and bacon. They'd set their stuff up, but Saturday afternoon we trained. Saturday night was always steak and potatoes. I don't care if we didn't have a dime to our name, we came up somehow with steak and potatoes for Saturday night. Sunday morning was training, and then Sunday afternoon we'd break down and go our separate ways. So there was always some good training out there.
I'm Kathy Streeter Morgan, and I've been a member of Henderson County Rescue Squad since 1981. It took a while for me to get in because this was a predominantly male institution, as all the fire and rescue services were in Henderson County. I came back to teach after graduate school at Hendersonville High School, and I was very active with the Red Cross, teaching lifeguarding, first aid, CPR, and I had a lot of contact with Herman Hawkins, who was the chief at that time. Herman was also a school crossing guard, and I had daily contact with him, and I talked to him and I said, Herman, is there any way you could get me in the rescue squad? I think that's something I would like to do. Herman thought about it, and he put his hand on his pipe and he said, that's not going to be an easy sell, Kathy, but I'll talk to the guys and see what I can work out, but you're going to have to give me some time. By time, he meant probably several months. And so he talked to several of them, and then he told me I could come down and meet some of them. And I did, and I had some time to spend around. I particularly remember of some of the old timers. There was Lloyd Jackson, there was Ralph Jones, there was Don Jones. One day I had an opportunity to need someone with a Jeep and a winch at our house. And I asked Lloyd if there was any way he could help us out. So Lloyd Jackson brought his old Willis Jeep out to the house, and I proceeded to get out the chainsaw and show him what we were cutting and what I needed help with. And then after that, I had won Lloyd over. And Lloyd said, if she can do all that, she can do what we do in the rescue squad. So I had another one on my side. Then it took a little while, and then Herman said, I think we can bring you in for a vote now. And in those days, they voted on you, and if you got 3 black balls, you were not allowed to join. Well, I got 1 I know of, maybe 2, but I did not get the 3. And a year or so later, one of the guys admitted to me that he had blackballed me and he had made a mistake. And I always remembered that, and I thought that was very big of him to admit that. So I got in Henderson County Rescue Squad.
Harrison, go ahead. Start cooking.
Yes, sir.
Here you go, Harrison.
Okay, ready for cribbing? Okay, Harrison, kind of kneel down so I'm walking the shot. Come this way. There we go. Okay, up on yellow and up on red. Up on red. Up on yellow. Up on red.
Max on yellow.
There you go, up on yellow.
You're max on yellow.
Push yellow in. Okay, spacer free. Okay, okay, make sure, Harrison, make sure your side's stable, put your cribbing in. There you go. On in, just a little bit more. Good job. Okay, there you go, you're stable, stable on your side, Anthony?
Yes, stable on those.
Okay.
Mike Edney. I joined the rescue squad in 1987. Had no intention of joining the rescue squad, but a friend of mine at the time, who was the city fireman at Hendersonville, Sam Morgan, convinced me to come and be on the dive team or help him start a dive team with the rescue squad. We had been diving together for about 10 years previous to that, and he wanted to make a formal dive team and talked me into it. So I joined January of '87 and not interested in anything else but diving. And by the end of the month, he had me signed up for an EMT class, and I started into that, and then the rest is history. I was the captain in '92 and '93, which now is called the chief, but in those days the officer was called the captain. When I joined in '87 in January, as I remember it, it was a cold winter, and one of the most important things I think we did at that time was transporting doctors and nurses from their homes to Pardee Hospital. And very few people had four-wheel drives in those days, and the ones that did were afraid to get out. So it's my opinion that in those days of the late 80s and previous to that, the squad had been doing it for many, many years, but from the time I remember, from the late 80s up until the blizzard, the rescue squad really was very instrumental in keeping Pardee Hospital open by transporting all of the technicians and doctors and folks that just had to be there. And after Pardee kept them for several days, then we'd take them home and they'd get a little bit of a rest. But then in '93, the blizzard occurred in Henderson County, and wow, no one was prepared for that. Very few people had four-wheel drive vehicles then, and it was so deep without specialized vehicles, you couldn't get out anyway. We had a man call every day from the top of Pinnacle Mountain. He had just moved here the summer before, and he said, I have no heat, I have no candles, I have no fireplace, I don't even have a flashlight, and no power, of course. But his phone worked, and there was absolutely no way we could get to this man to rescue him and get him out of there. But he made contact with us every single day. And finally, a neighbor was finally able to get him off of Pinnacle Mountain with a farm tractor. And that's the way it was all over the county. We ran nonstop for about a week, hauling people. Our current chief, Jimmy Brissy, had been a member since he was 14, and he had just turned 16 during the blizzard. And Jimmy showed the skill and dedication, which was very unusual for a 16-year-old, that he was actually driving the hospital's ambulances, or EMS's ambulances, whenever they were able to get back on the road. And I remember that year Jimmy got an award for working. He worked 100 straight hours during the blizzard, and that's just incredible. And that's like so many of the other people. The folks that I knew from the time I joined, and the stories I heard before that, the dedication in those days was all volunteers. You spent many hours training, you spent many hours on calls, doing standbys, and of course you were away from your families this whole time. And it's just not a way to explain why people do that. I've been asked over and over again, why do people want to spend that time? Why do you want to give it up? And I don't know. There's a lot of answers, but it's individual for each person, I guess.
Try not to use the bottom of the river. Robbie. Try to put his feet down with his thumb. Watch that knot, watch that knot.
Chase, you missed the rope. Can you get a second rope? Second rope, second rope.
Make sure you get down. Don't wrap your hand.
Don't wrap, don't wrap. Carry your arm back up. There you go. No movement.
One of my jobs as a squadman, all of 8 or 9 or 10 years old, was that when we would have searches or we would have extended calls, maybe a river dragging or something like that, that we had to feed everybody. And there was a place down on 25 called the Smokehouse. Mr. Lemon had it, I believe was his name. And it didn't matter whether it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd call down there and we'd say, we're feeding a bunch. And you'd go down there in an hour, and he'd always have 50 hamburgers and 50 cheeseburgers and as many fries as he could get in the baskets to cook. And he would throw everything together and catch me later on, guys. So the community took care of the squad as the squad took care of the community.
It wasn't long after I had become a member, and we did start the scuba rescue team. Sam and some of the other leaders of the rescue squad at that time decided that we needed to specialize in certain things. The fire departments had started doing some extrication and some rescue stuff, which they should have. The county got to be so big, it was impossible for us to drive in a reasonable amount of time from here to the far corners of the county with all of the traffic that was involved. So we started looking at other things to do as a specialty group. We developed a very good high angle team, the rope rescues, to get people off the side of mountains and out of from ravines. And in time since then, we have developed search and rescue teams, winter search and rescue teams, which actually the folks get training. They go out in the ice and snow and spend a weekend training on how to do rescues in sub-freezing temperatures. We're developing structural collapse teams, trench rescue teams, and several other different things we're evolving into to specialize.